do we have
Noel is
Noel?
also
There we
Weston.
go.
Yeah, he was throwing you a curveball there.
I was wondering if that would be the case. I was like, maybe you shared your speaker link with him.
Yeah, he told me he had it got lost on a terminal someplace. There wasn't a chassis to recover it.
It was a supply chain issue.
I shared my chassis with him. So.
Well, the truth, Julian, is I've always wanted to be like Weston, so this is my opportunity here to.
That said no one ever in the history of the world. Thank you.
Oh gosh, and John, it's your first time joining us. How's it going?
It is good. How are you guys doing?
Doing really well, thank you. So yeah, we've been talking about supply chain and some of its attendant issues. Obviously, like sustainability and ESG stuff is baked in ways that you're just like, we know that it's important. It should be in there. We've waited for it for this long, and it's got to happen at like the most intense time. But it's like, I guess these things just have a mind of their own sometimes. So, so folks, I'm really excited because this is probably the thing that has gotten the most headlines, memes. You guys are in a memeable time and with a memeable issue. It's on Instagram and everything. So
the best meme is the folks waiting in the water off a beach with a container ship behind them. It says lines for Black Friday.
Yeah.
Right. And now the New Yorker cover with Santa pulling in the ship to the terminal.
Well, I've been saying Santa's going to need a little extra help this year. So
for sure.
Yeah. Well, with that, where are we at, Noel? You're the one at the port. You see it when it comes in from the ship to everything that happens downstream, and somehow, I think unfairly, the ports get a little bit the headlines about all this stuff, but you are there and you see a lot. So
yeah,
what's happening over there?
Well, we definitely see a lot. Julian, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure to join you and my longtime friends and partners in crime, John Gold and the real Weston LaBar. Weston, thanks for letting me borrow your link. But I think you set the stage very well. First of all, we've never seen anything like what we're seeing today. I think John and Weston would agree. Just to give your audience some perspective, in calendar year 2021, the ports of LA and Long Beach together, we're going to be handling 20 million container units. That's more than twice what the next gateway in the US is going to handle this year. I mean, it's a massive amount of cargo. And you're right, the ships at anchor are probably the most visible picture of what's happening, but I can assure you, it's not just a port congestion issue. The bottlenecks are up and down the supply chain. The number one reason why we have so many ships at anchor, which by the way, those numbers are coming down steadily. As of just an hour ago, we're down to 40 ships at anchor. A couple of weeks ago, it was up to 86. Thanks to a new protocol put into place by PMA, PMSA, and the Marine Exchange. And thanks to some of the efforts and initiatives from all of our supply chain partners. But the number one reason why we have so many ships at anchor is because containers are piling up in the terminals. Just today, Julian, in the Port of Long Beach, there are well over 120,000 containers inside the terminals. That's inbound, outbound, empties. And the reason they're piling up there is because the warehouses are full, the DCs are full. And I'll let John comment on that aspect of it. Weston can certainly comment on some of the issues involving the limitations for trucks to pull the containers out. But I mean, the bottom line is we've never seen this amount of volume. And at the same time, capacity is crunched up and down the supply chain, right? So these are the two forces, both induced by the pandemic, that we're dealing with is how do we handle this record amount of cargo at a time when capacity is constrained up and down the supply chain. Very briefly, 3 key actions the ports have undertaken with the support of the administration and the port envoy, John Picari. Number 1, we started activating vacant land to provide immediate relief to the terminals. Port of Long Beach took the first step last fall with 17 acres at Pier S. We've grown that now to 70 acres. When you combine that with other parcels that we've activated in recent weeks, we're at about 100 acres now, Julian. that we've applied. And that's to provide relief to the terminals, give our shippers another spot to drop off empties. The second major action we took with the support of the administration is we took the first step towards a 24/7 operation framework. One of our terminals in Long Beach TTI is open 24 hours a day, 4 days a week. And every other terminal in Long Beach and Los Angeles is expanding their hours of operation. They're opening earlier, they're closing later, open on weekends. Again, all in an effort to expand opportunities to our shippers and our motor carriers to pull their containers out. And then the third major action, which has been postponed to John's delight, is another incentive. Again, we're using every tool at our disposal. We announced a fee at the end of October on aging long dwelling containers on the inbound side. Thanks to the progress achieved by the shipping lines, the terminals working in conjunction with all of our shippers, those containers that were targeted by this fee are down about 37%. So we're going to continue to evaluate, but so far, wherever you look, every measurable metric that we've been tracking the last few months is moving in the right direction.
So Julian, can I maybe hop in quickly and make a few quick comments? So one thing I think that's important to point out, and you see the large ship behind Noel right there in his background. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are unique in the fact that 80 to 100% of the ship's cargo is going to discharge off that ship at that terminal that it's calling at. And you look at East Coast ports, or I think the better example in some cases is even the European ports where even larger ships are calling, but only a little bit of the cargo is coming off and on every time it stops. That ship may stop at 22 seaports from the time it leaves Asia to the time it gets to Europe, and then it heads back and does the same thing. There's complete ports that take cargo off and it never leaves the port itself. It goes back on another ship to go to a different port. And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize is as the ships get bigger, it's not like we're taking a small amount of cargo more, an incremental amount of cargo more. We're actually taking all of the rest of the cargo that ship has on it. So if you go from a 10,000 TEU ship to a 15,000 TEU ship, you're getting 5,000 extra TEUs all dumped at one time. And that's a big issue as it relates to congestion, because every time a ship calls on the ports, you're creating these almost mini peaks. Every time these large vessels would show up, it's just now they're showing up more frequently. A couple other things I'd just like to point out, and then I'm sure John will have some input on this, is from our experience with our customers, the warehouses are not full, but the yards are. And that's because, as Noel talked about the containers, as of yesterday, between the ports of LA and Long Beach, over 120,000 empty containers were sitting on the terminals between the two seaports. And that is a huge issue because the terminal only has so much space or so much allocation, what they can take back for an ocean carrier to be able to have it on their terminal at any given time. And when that fills up, it's impossible for a trucker to be able to pull an empty container from their yard or from their customer's yard, which would be John's members, to be able to get a dual transaction, essentially take that empty container back, be able to use one driver, one truck, one chassis, and grab an import container with that power and that capacity. And what we're seeing is not only is it hard to bring some things back, sometimes it's because certain shipping lines like Wanhai, which has been in the news a lot lately, they decided that they were going to transfer imports to the East Coast, but they stranded a lot of empties for a while here at the West Coast. In many cases, carriers could not return their empties for well over a month based on the way that they tried to sequence it. That takes up valuable real estate outside of the gates. It takes up valuable chassis. And when we're doing dual transactions, you would think, oh, we hear all these empty containers are sitting at yards and you've got these imports, but I got to match up a very specific container with a very specific transaction at the terminal to the case where I may have 100 containers to move at a terminal in a weekend. However, I may have 5 containers that I can return to that terminal to match it up with. And what we really need to figure out is how we diminish the restrictions that are impacting the trucking community to return those empties, because in actuality, we don't have a driver shortage. And I don't even know if we have a true chassis shortage, but we have a capacity issue. And capacity is relative because if I got a driver that can only do 1 transaction a day versus 3 transactions a day, I've artificially diminished my trucking fleet by threefold. And from a trucker's perspective, we want to get 3+ turns movements in and out of that terminal a day, and we're averaging around 1. So we have this capacity crunch. The chassis that are sitting out with containers on them, the chassis pool was built for a 3-day dwell time outside of the terminal. Well, right now the average is over 9 days. So now again, I've diminished my chassis capacity threefold. And what that means is capacity is relative, and whether or not we have a shortage really depends on how we operate in an efficient manner. Do we have the velocity and the fluidity necessary? And that's what we're really missing. Is there's a lot of there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, a lot of different, it's like playing poker. Which cards can you play on which hand when you talk about getting containers back in to pick up containers? And if we were able to get more turns, if we were able to basically gray the empty pool and be able to be guaranteed that every time we have an import pickup, we have an empty drop off. If we were able to, to a certain degree, minimize the amount of empty containers being dropped via rail at the port that are not coming out of it. People don't realize that containers being imported into Canada, the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, they terminate in Chicago, they get on rail, and they get first priority in the ports of LA Long Beach, which further lock out truckers. These are all things that are outside the gate that are causing issues inside the gate and outside the gate.
Yes. And now check it out. So one thing that I'm hoping that folks who are watching this can absorb from everything that's going on here is that, you know, you can pick out operations people from a crowd, right? There's a certain kind of urgency in everybody that I know who's in this space is working so hard to unwind and unscrew this situation. And they're not thinking so much about like the way that Phil, the economist from Flexport, was describing it, which is this is demand-led thing, way above surge. We're not supposed to be living with a situation like this, and it's been going on for a long time. And now we hit the summer of reopening, and then the holidays, and of course it was going to go bananas. And folks, we have some compassion for these guys. I mean, listen to them. They're talking about solving these darn problems, and they're going to do it. And that I say that to frame up the question of, you know, I know from having gotten to know the Port of Long Beach and the folks around the ports over the past, you know, couple of years a little bit. You know, it's a slice of what I look at. And it's been a really warm community and opening itself to me. But one of the things that does come up quite a bit is that there were things that wanted changing beforehand that have now broken. And it was very, very obvious that something was going to come along when it would need changing, and it did. What were those things? And I know that the port has been refurbishing and investing and doing all kinds of stuff, including its sustainability efforts, and it really is a leader in that regard. But then there's like a lot of the nerdy things that I am, as an outsider, would not know very much about. I'm gonna go with someone from outside of the local community for a second and introduce you. John, hi. So what did you see from Washington on the policy angle and constantly catch wind from your members about in this regard, which is with these abiding problems in systems not talking to each other? What kind of investment needs to be made in that? You know, the kinds of things that would be able to address the system of systems type stuff that you mentioned the other day, and which could have an effect on how smooth all this stuff works.
Yeah. So Julian, thanks for inviting me to participate today. You know, a lot of these issues existed well before COVID. I mean, Noel, Weston, and I have been working on this stuff better part of a decade on some of the challenges we've been facing with port congestion. You know, I look back to the work we did back in, was it 2014, when we had the last, you know, slowdown because of the labor negotiations. And it always centers around the gate operation and how quickly can we move the truck in and out of the gate. You know, the fact that we can't come up with a common definition of what a turn time is continues to be a challenge. Is it when the gate the truck enters the gate or it gets in line at the queue. I think Weston and I will both argue it's, when it enters the queue. And that's where things we need to kind of focus in on. We've had these ongoing discussions about how do we fix some of these core issues. We make a lot of progress, get together, have these meetings, and then things get better. So folks kind of go away and it's like, we'll deal with it another time. This is the time to deal with it. We can't wait for something else. I think the ports have done a good job in trying to get the stakeholders together. I think I'll give credit to Port of LA and Port of Long Beach on the data they're using and putting out. LA's got their port optimizer. The Port of Long Beach has their wave report. And, Noel's heard me say this before, but I think we all wish they were on the same system and using the same platform. I don't care, whose system it is, as long as they can work together. But I think that's where one of the challenges is that you don't have the connectivity that you need among all the stakeholders to really plan appropriately for disruption and be able to respond as quickly as you need to. And this has been an ongoing challenge and frustration from a lot of people, is that there's always this fear of, for the retailers, they've got visibility into their supply chain throughout, except when it gets to the port, it's a black box. They can't figure out what's happening once the container arrives. Is where is it? How am I getting it? And when's it going to move? And that just continues to be a challenge today. And, even with the progress that's been made, to date, I'm still hearing from a lot of my members of the challenges of getting containers that are stuck on the bottom of piles, and the fact that they're getting charged because there are containers on the bottom of a pile, even though they want to get it and they're trying to get it, but they can't because of the issues Weston raised about returning the empty and getting a chassis. So these are just all ongoing issues that I think we need to address today. I know in the policy space, the administration and Congress certainly are paying a lot of attention to what's going on. Early on, we called for the White House to get engaged early because we knew it was going to take the bully pulpit of the White House to get folks together to try and fix these issues. Because to be honest, as I said, we've tried to do it before, but having the weight of the White House behind that, I think is helping to a degree, but we need more of that. We've got to be more creative about what we're looking at and how to get out of the situation so we're not here again in the future, because we all know we're going to see a future disruption. Hopefully not to this extent. Nobody could plan a global pandemic going on for 2 years and just what we've seen. And part of that is just the demand for goods and inputs and raw materials is just far outpacing the availability of everything that's needed to not only just make those products, but get it through the system all the way to the end consumer. You're just seeing that all throughout. But we've got to be smarter about what we're doing. Is 24/7 the solution? I don't know. Can we be better about how we're using the systems that we are today? Do we need to introduce more technology into what we're doing? Whether it's automation or something else, we've got to take a look at how do we improve our systems, because our supply chains were not meant to run at the rate we're running today. We've got to figure out a better path forwards.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that, Julian, and if anybody's never seen me speak before, I go on my own cues, so I apologize. But if you look at, first of all, we've had this congestion every peak season, every time there's an episode. And prior to my role with Cargomatic, I was CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association for 7 years. And I used to joke, I've been through at least one once in a lifetime congestion episode. Each year I was in the Harbor Trucking Association. That's a lot of lives. I've got 2 more left if I'm a cat, I guess. So you look at that, this time around, we've had essentially 18, 20 straight months of a peak season that has not stopped. And in fact, it's grown every month in volume. And what has happened before is you get the congestion, the buildup, and then you have the ability to dig out. And we have not had the ability to dig out. And so we're trying to figure out how to solve a very complex issue with, I would say, more than a decade of neglect on the supply chain, with very simple silver bullet solutions in some instances. And it doesn't work that way. I've been on record and I'll
Wait, what doesn't work that way?
You can't solve complex issues with simple solutions. You need to understand.
I thought that you were arguing.
You can't solve years and years of issues with a quick, we're just going to go 24/7, right? And there's that added aspect of, we have hours of service. You go 24/7 port, my drivers can't drive 24/7, right? There's a safety aspect to it. But over $11 billion was spent between Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And as everybody was shopping and consuming more, truck drivers were still working, warehouse workers were still working, port workers were still working. And it's not thank you for getting us the goods you're getting us, it's you need to work harder to get me all of my goods. And we need people to understand that if you want everything within 24 hours or less when you order it, you need trucks and warehouses in your neighborhoods. You can't block every bit of the supply chain that's there to support the port. And where we've done a great job is investing in our port infrastructure proper, deeper channels, higher cranes. Noel, 100 acres freed up in one port authority. But you got the city of Long Beach, impossible to permit a truck yard, impossible to permit a warehouse. They prefer cannabis growing operations to logistics operations. It's less trucking intensive. Port has a growth plan for the next 10 years. City of Long Beach wants to shut down the overweight corridor known as the Terminal Island Freeway, turn it into a park. Those are issues that we see every single day. And unless you have an infrastructure outside the gate that mirrors the capacity of the port will be capped. And this is something Noel and I have talked about for a very long time. People need to understand that the entire economy and every person that lives in this country is dependent on their supply chain. It doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter who you are dependent on the supply chain. If you bought it, a truck brought it. And what we need to do is start appreciating all of the hard work that happens in the supply chain and understand if you want that Amazon package, if you want UPS showing up at your door, you got to embrace logistics in your community. And until we have folks that embrace logistics in our community, this is going to happen. And I've been on record of saying this is going to continue until people stop buying stuff, until there's a recession. And when there's a recession, we can dig out of this. We'll have plenty of cargo. We got 4 months of cargo to move without another ship showing up. And we'll have the ability to dig out and hopefully learn our lesson this time. And as a community, not the supply chain, but as a community as a whole, and government and elected officials, come together to figure out the next generation of how we move goods and do it in a way that really takes into consideration the needs of the folks working to move these goods from point A to point B. Otherwise, we'll be just as fragile as we are right now.
You know, Julian,
Noel, I'm curious about how you'd answer that question too, right? You know, like
Yeah.
what was cracking and what were people complaining about? You know, the patch of paint in the hall that needed a little bit of touch up, but you know, there's that, and then there's like, you know, we've got a serious problem in our driveway, or the pipe's about to burst. You know, what's changed for you? Like, what warrants a real overhaul, and then what's just like, it's too soon to say whether, you know, we need to be going crazy with these kinds of things that people think, because, you know, this is a surge and we just don't know how long it's going to last, you know. And then of course there's everything Weston said. What do you think?
well, first of all, this is not a problem that duct tape, right, can fix. I mean, what you're looking at right now, I mean, we all thought we knew what the perfect storm would look like. You know, John referenced the 2014-15 disruption. We thought we saw the perfect storm in 2018-19 with the US-China trade war. But boy, this is the mother of all perfect storms. And I think what you're hearing from us, Julian, and I think if you ask policymakers, leaders across the industry, we're not about to let this crisis go to waste. There's wide recognition that there are some long-term fixes and enhancements that the supply chain needs. If we're going to be handling this volume of cargo on a year-to-year basis, we have no choice. And that's what you're hearing. I would say, to build off John's and Weston's comments, that the stars may be aligning. We have this historic infrastructure bill that just passed, that the president signed. That's a tremendous step forward to building the infrastructure and the supply chain that we need in the future. But we need to pair that up with other operational enhancements. Technology will play a pivotal role. I agree 100% with John. The technology exists today that can help move our supply chain into the next level. And at the Port of Long Beach, we're 100% committed to that. We're working towards that. But again, it's a system of systems, right? So we need to find a way to make sure that technology is interoperable, just the way that the operations are. With that in mind, we also need to fix legacy issues, restrictions, whether it's restrictions on hours of service on the trucking side, whether it's restrictions on empty returns at the terminals. We need to find a way to overcome those restrictions and let the path of cargo be more seamless, right? So it's really a combination of all of these efforts. I'm pleased to let you know, Julian, that That's what we're discussing, right? In the meetings that we have with the port envoy, with the administration, those are the types of discussions we're having. It's not just about fixing the near-term issues, going for the low-hanging fruit. It's also a conversation that encompasses some real meaningful changes that need to happen to support the supply chain of the future.
And I think, Julian, I think to Noel's point, I think we've got to look at how do we reimagine the supply chain for the 21st century. Let's come into a room with a whiteboard, ignore everything that works today, and figure out how do we make this work for the volumes that we're seeing today, with the technologies we need today. How do we get all the partners together and understand at each step along the way, here's what I need, and then work from there. And I think that's what's been lacking up to now. It's everybody's like, here's my piece of it. I don't care what happens after that. No, break down the wall. We're all connected through this thing together. We've got to figure out holistically, how does this whole system work? Because it is a system of systems. And if one piece breaks down, that next piece breaks down, next piece breaks down. And we're seeing that over and over again today.
Yep. And
Well, that's something that I
24/7
want to
is
ask all of you. Oh, go
I was
ahead.
just going to add, Julian, 24/7 is a perfect example. I mean, we recognize here in Long Beach, since we took that first step, it's an aspirational vision at this point, right? It's a framework. We wanted to get the ball rolling, but by starting here in one terminal, we know that it will require everyone else in the supply chain to follow suit, right? So, but we're building towards that. But like John said, each of us in the supply chain, we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to recognize that we're part of a broader system, and we need to find a way to align our operations to make that movement of cargo from segment to segment more seamless.
And Julian, go back 10 years, the supply chain worked better because it was vertically integrated in most instances. Blue box came on a blue ship, went to a blue terminal, got on a blue chassis, truck dropped off a blue box on a blue chassis, picked up the one that was there, and it was a closed loop, right? And in some cases, that same company that owned the steamship line, that owned the terminal, had a trucking company, they had house truckers, they owned the chassis, it was vertically integrated. The next generation of supply chain is one of virtual integration. One where we have standards around API sets, about data quality, one where we can all see the same thing. So these are not blind handoffs. These are not a situation where I can't get to that terminal because I'm stuck at this terminal, or I can't have a transaction there because the container has to go over there, right? So the next iteration of supply chain, the modern supply chain, is one that looks vertical because it's virtually integrated. And I think the work that has been done, some of the groundwork that's been laid in the private sector by some of the closed loops or at the port, with some of the things that they've tried to do with the wave, being transparent with data. These are steps in the right direction. And if you look at even like a company like ours, Cargomatic, 70% of the trucking fleets in America operate 10 trucks or less, but the majority of the freight is moved by the top 100 importers. It's impossible for a company like a Walmart or an Amazon or a Target or most of John's members to say, well, let me go find a whole bunch of 1Z, 2Z, 5Z, 10Z trucking companies. But what we've done, right, is we've created a platform where we aggregate that. The average size truck on our platform is around 10, operates about 10 trucks. We have 22,000 trucks on our platform nationwide. Those are the types of things where private industry can come together, not to be a disruptor, but to be an enabler. How do you take disruptive technology to enable the supply chain to be better? And it starts with everybody agreeing to standards. To John's point, what's the turn time? Right? Those are little things. And if you can start to digitize the supply chain, you can agree on a set of rules and standards, then you can really get to a point where we have visibility into everything, not visibility into silos.
Yeah, and what other, there's a question that I'll come back to you with in a second, but now that we're on the topic of, there were a lot of antiquated systems still kind of being used. There were a lot of things that people wanted to change, but no one was going to fire them if they didn't change them tomorrow. And it seems like a lot of that has that has a bright light has been shown on all of those, and we know that we need to make investments or change the way that some of that stuff work. What other kinds of innovations and technology companies, folks like Cargomatic, maybe the Flexports, who else is out there that is offering solutions that did not have the brute force of either capital or lobbying power at the local or state levels to be able to get things done the way that they ought to, that now have the whatever capital it was that they needed, now that they've got it, who else is out there, and what makes, yeah, who else is out there, and how can they be utilized?
I think there's still a huge element of sunken cost fallacy and legacy think. And what I mean by that is, one of the biggest things that I experienced for many years was going to partners with an idea or a concept that would have made things better. And one of two things was always given back to us. Either, well, that's just not the way things have been done here. That's that legacy think, like we do it this way, we're not changing the way we do it. Or we've already invested X amount of dollars in the system that we have, so we're not going to change it. And we all know that just because you invested money in something doesn't mean that making a better investment won't actually help you recoup more money. That sunken cost fallacy has been a huge issue. And I don't know that everybody is perfectly funded, or everybody has the juice behind them, because you still have a lot of convincing to do with folks. Remember, the light that's shining is really trying to expose where people are making money off of the supply chain inefficiencies, purposefully slowing the supply chain down to make economic benefit for themselves. And that does exist. And that's been a problem for a very long time. But what you've seen with technologies is the ability, I think, to aggregate resources. So in the way that we do it for truck power, you've seen companies like Secure Space create an Airbnb for truck parking, which I think is huge, because how many times did companies need space and somebody else had space, but you had to go out and lease a whole lot of land to be able to do what you needed to do. So democratizing yard space. Companies like Blue Cargo, who have been able to scrape data and integrate with certain terminals to create a single platform for empty returns and an archive for what the hurdles have been. It doesn't always help you return the empties, but at least it helps you convey why you shouldn't be penalized for not being able to return empties. You look at some of the transportation management systems out there that are now becoming cloud-based and API enabled, which is a huge opportunity, because now you can actually integrate with folks in a way that you couldn't do it before. And I think that's going to be a lot of what you see moving forward, is around things like integrations again, and data sharing. It's not that we don't have the data, it's that a lot of it isn't shared or isn't good data. So again, I think that you're seeing opportunities to move forward, but you still have to push the adoption. And that will only happen when people are truly incentivized to move cargo in the most efficient manner, as opposed to folks that have made businesses around cargo not moving.
You know, Julian, let me add a comment on technology. I mean, I think all of us agree that the technology exists, right? We're seeing it leverage in other spaces, industries. I think the key here, though, is technology by itself is just a tool. It becomes a solution when it's properly integrated into the operations and when the technology is interoperable. And I think those are the two missing links, because I can tell you, Weston enumerated a number of entities that are doing amazing work, right? And they're doing it in certain pockets of the supply chain, but we haven't seen anything really rolled out wholesale along the lines of what John is describing. And I like what he said. I think what truly, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity, Weston, to use your phrase, to get it right and reimagine the supply chain to make sure that we leverage all of these new technologies, all of these new platforms, but also the standards, right? So that's what gets me excited, right? That's what I'm thinking about. I'm looking ahead and thinking about where we go from here once we get out of this near-term crisis and truly leverage the policies that are being discussed, the infrastructure bill, the investments in technology, and really the collaboration that we're seeing today, which is extraordinary, right, between every segment of the supply chain.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I was about to ask the following question, right? So if it's got all this C-level attention at the moment, and you've either got a bottom up or a top down system-wide, origin of solutions or pressure to solve the problem, you've got what you said, John, which is taking the administration's leadership, or the president using the bully pulpit to get people talking. You've got players within the system trying to get together and talk, and then you've got these solutions that Weston mentioned, and also folks who can just make some changes and help make things work better. To me, it seems that is the key factor here then is what large cargo movers and folks who are doing a lot of the clicking and buying, you know, how do they play a constructive role in making sure that the right things happen and avoiding the wrong things?
I think the two biggest drivers, the biggest one from an opportunistic standpoint internally within the supply chain are John's members, right? Because they have the ability, they are the ultimate customer of everybody. They have the ability to push the distribution chain, essentially, right? The folks that are picking up and dropping off and moving the cargo, they have the ability to push standards on folks and say, I won't work with you unless you do this, which is where, again, like companies like ours have come into place because we can provide that standard level, and then we can actually still aggregate a whole bunch of folks, but we basically level them up, right? We give them an opportunity by leveraging data and technology. As I like to say, we give small businesses big opportunities, but those are the standards that his members are pushing down on companies like ours, and hopefully other folks in the industry will level up. The other side of it goes back to the consumer, and the consumer needs to understand the role the supply chain plays in their everyday life. And they need to understand that there's nothing wrong with turning a defunct mall into a fulfillment center for e-commerce. They need to understand that there's nothing wrong with taking you know, an abandoned lot and turning it into a container drop yard during peak season. They need to understand that having a truck terminal in their city is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because it's localizing freight. It's creating more capacity. It's reducing air emissions. And we need to quit conflating on the environmental front the difference between climate change and local air quality. We can get very good local air quality by localizing trucking and being more efficient. But at the same time, if we start to spread out our supply chains because we want the warehouses 300 miles away from where everybody lives, we're actually putting more emissions in the atmosphere from a holistic standpoint, and we're negatively impacting climate change. And so there's the hope is that mainstream media starts to actually understand what they're reporting on. And there's been some good stories out there recently, but we need them to more accurately tell people how important the supply chain is on their lives, as opposed to say, those darn truckers aren't picking up containers again, and you're not going to get your Christmas package. Well, if you would have allowed for us to be able to build the infrastructure necessary over the last decade, as opposed to shut down truck terminals and push back on the industry as a whole, make John's members have to locate warehouses in the middle of Timbuktu, as opposed to where the population centers are, we wouldn't have these issues.
I feel you on the media covering these kinds of things. I mean, anything that I, you know, any of my areas of specialty, you know.
My mother-in-law knows more about the supply chain than I do now. That's all I know.
Look, in order to fix this, you've got to have a willingness among all partners to want to fix it. And I think that's where the challenge is laid from the past, where some people say, hey, it'll fix itself. We'll get there when demand dies down. We got to get beyond that and figure out how do we fix this thing going forwards, because we can't afford to be in this disruptive mode for forever. You know, again, as Weston said, every year there seems to be something else that happens. And we know that, and we've got to be prepared. And I think there's got to be a willingness among all partners. Look, my guys don't have contractual relationships with everybody. You know, we don't have a contractual relationship with the terminal operators, but yet they're part of the challenge here. And that's where we got to figure out how do we fix the gate moves, which is an essential part of this. But that's where the carriers come into play. I mean, we've got the relations with the carriers, but to a degree, but they got to be willing to be able to do some things too. I mean, hell, we're paying more now than we ever did for the worst service we've ever had. So how do we correct that going forwards?
Well, John, I mean, this leads to another question that I was just about to ask you, which is, what kind of mood are the senior most executives that you're dealing with, either at the board level or, you know, very active members within NRF? What are they in the mood for? Because they've been dealing with some for a long time, right? And there's got to be some frustration and desire and demand for stability. Obviously, it's been a new issue every single time, but it really does come down to, like, there's got to be some sanity here that
Look, they want stability and certainty in their operations, and they haven't seen that in 18 months. You know, and obviously a lot of that's due to the pandemic. But again, a lot of these issues existed well before. It's been further exacerbated by the pandemic and the challenges we've seen. But I think,
but then there was the tariffs, and before that,
yeah.
You know, I mean, you know,
like
when I'm saying the reason why I was turning to you about that is that it was something that Weston was referring to, is that every single time it's something new, and yet it hits the port in brand new ways. And my viewers are looking at this as like, what do I got to be doing in Singapore? What do I need to be doing in Vietnam? Should I be scanning Chinese social media to figure out if people are even in the mood to work? Like, you
Just
know,
quickly, Julian, when you talk about 18, 19, there was a cliff, right? So we ramped up and then freight stopped showing up and we had a backlog, but we had a bunch of months to catch up on it before we had another issue. Again, this is a every month, record setting, volumes coming in. There's no Lunar New Year that we're going to be able to dig out of. It's going to be busy. There's no Christmas holiday. I worked every day but Thanksgiving, and I worked in the kitchen that day, right? And it's because I was trying to help customers get things out. I'm not even in operations, but I've put on the operations hat to say, what can we do? Because it's all hands on deck. And that's been the difference is we've had these big balloons of volume followed by troughs. There's been no trough.
There's been no ability to really dig out because we haven't seen the slowdown yet. You know, last year we hit 22 million TEUs for a record. This year we're on track based on our numbers, looking at 26 million TEUs. I mean, that's our systems were not designed to handle that much throughput on a continual basis. And we got to figure out a better way to manage this process from beginning to end. And again, you know, I know we're spending a lot of time focusing on what's happening here, but this is a global issue impacting, you know, from the very start, as far as the ability to actually just make the product overseas, and for U.S. manufacturers to make the product here, they're facing challenges as well.
So I'm going to give Noel the last comment here, but like, I am curious about the vibe among your members, right? Like, to what extent are they willing to unify and start making demands? Like, what do they really want? What are they willing to do? Because I'm sure that it's like a lot of things, right? Where, you know, they ask you for things, but you can say, hey, look, if you really want this thing, it's got to be like this. What is the nature of all of that, if I may ask?
I mean, I think there's
the nature of those conversations.
I mean, I think there's certainly a mood, and there are a lot of conversations going on among partners. I mean, you know, the contract negotiations between retailers and carriers are starting now, and there are gonna be some tough conversations among those parties. I'm not privy to those conversations. I don't want to be part of those conversations, but there's gonna be a lot of discussion about, you know, rates versus service, and, you know, how do we fix this going forwards? I think, you know, for years, many of my members talked about the fact that they were willing to pay more as long as they got better service, which never materialized. So how do we fix this, the entirety of the system? And we've got to start having those conversations now. How do we bring more visibility into the system, which is so critically important? So I think getting that data standardization, you know, there are some efforts ongoing by the carriers themselves. They realize they are behind the times on data standardization and digitization, but that's got to happen now, and we've got to be better prepared going forwards. And I think that's part of the conversations is for my members to talk to the carrier, say, we need better visibility, and the way you're going to get there is through this data standardization.
Yeah, two quick comments. One would be, we're actually paying, maybe more so now, but the truer cost of freight. And I'll say truer because we don't know what, but for a long time, everything was pushing down to the least common denominator, and thus that's how a lot of this neglect came. It was all about controlling cost. It was less about figuring out how to be the most efficient or the best actor in the industry. And that's, I think, been corrected in the sense that now we're looking at how do we have a sustainable supply chain. And I hope that continues moving forward, but we have to be willing to have real open conversations about out of the box ideas. When the pool of pools was created for chassis, why don't we have a container pool of pools, right? Why don't we have a situation where all of these containers are aggregated together in the ports of LA, Long Beach, and everybody contributes in the same way they do on the pool of pools, at least on an alliance level. So you don't have to have, this is a one person's container one day, and then I have to do this paperwork. And so it's just all part of the same thing. It goes to and from the same terminals. We simplify the process. Let's create a pool of pools on the containers. These are things that we can do to fix a lot of the issues today, but those are things that nobody wants to talk about because of the potential commercial impact to some of the folks out there.
Noel,
well, Julian, I think it's only fair that we leave this panel on a positive note. So I've got two positives, right? One is, by any measurable metric or indicator, things are moving in the right direction in the near term. But the more encouraging thing for all your viewers is that the discussions that are being had today are good signs for the future. I think the stars may be aligning. I mean, there's a lot of wheels that are spinning, but we need to make sure that the wheels are spinning in the same direction. We need that alignment. And I think for the first time, at least since I've been in this space, we're headed in that direction. So I'm certainly optimistic about it. I look forward to continue working with John and his members and Weston and companies like his to reimagine the supply chain and make sure that we in the US have the supply chain that we deserve.
Well, Noel, before we all break, I wanted to ask you one more question. You know, with as much C-level attention as there is out there right now on all this stuff, what do you think is possible? Like, what would your top 1, 2, 3 priorities be? Like, if you could change some part of the system as you see it now, to make it all better with this kind of attention on the matter, and so many people feeling it's so important, and knowing that demand is likely to stay high for a long time, this is the supply chain's moment. What are you going to do? What would be your top picks?
Julian, we have to fix the empty return challenge. That is the one key thing that is impeding our ability to move inbound containers out of our terminals with velocity and efficiency. We've got to figure out a better way to manage the empty returns. Secondly, we've got to figure out how to make chassis more fluid. Chassis were not designed to be makeshift warehouses. We've got to fix that. And then thirdly, we've got to truly integrate technology in a way that is seamless, interoperable, and really connects the whole system virtually, as Weston said. I think those are the 3 things that we can do today to make some meaningful improvements in the supply chain.
Well, it feels like there's a lot of agreement here.
We all agree. That's why we all agreed to do this panel together. We could have added 1 or 2 other people. It might have been a different tone.
Yeah.
Well, Weston, I feel like you're down to throw a bomb or two. Like, who would disagree with you, and what's keeping these things from happening? We've got another session that's supposed to start, but someone's got to start cussing somewhere. Like,
yeah, I'm gonna not hurl any grenades at people, but what I would just say is that, again, we need to look.
Why are you all in agreement and the problem is still happening? So that's to summarize.
Again, we are in other countries. The difference is that politics and business can be the same thing, and here, politics and business are like church and state. And there are folks that, again, their commercial interests do not align with the improvements needed in the supply chain. And until you get to a point where everybody has a commercial interest to improve the supply chain in a holistic manner, you're going to continue to get the type of decisions by key stakeholders that undermine the rest of the supply chain. And you look at, and you can't say it broadly, it can be individual contributors. You look at what CMA just said, they're paying, they bought a terminal, they're paying for additional hours out of their pocket, they're paying for incentives. Good for CMA, good for Ed Aldridge, good for the stuff that they're doing. Wanhai, I'm just gonna take my car to the East Coast. I'm gonna abandon tens of thousands of containers here in Southern California. They finally had a ship show up yesterday, didn't tell anybody about it because I found out today after it was full. That's not a partner. And that's the thing, is we all have to be incentivized to do what's in the best interest of the supply chain as a whole. And we all have to make money off of things working, not things breaking.
All right. So folks who are watching, keep an eye out for the rent seekers out there. They're out there. And maybe I'll put together a roundtable, something off the record, Chatham House rules, or even on deep background to start getting down to the bottom of this. Oh, all right, gentlemen, thank you so much. You know, it's a rare privilege to have this much expertise on something like this at a moment like this, and I genuinely appreciate it. I know that the folks who are watching do as well, and you know, we'll turn out some clips and things like that and cast it around the internet. But thank you for doing this today. Great to see you, Noel. I haven't seen you in a long time. I think we did something early on in lockdown. So thanks for doing it.
My pleasure, Julian. It's great seeing you as well. It's always a pleasure to be with John and Weston as well.
Yeah, thanks for
And
having.
John, thanks for doing it the first time. Weston, absolutely. So thank you. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you guys. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Happy holidays.